Can you hear me? Yes, now you can hear me. Good evening, everyone. What a turnout. Welcome to the Ode aan code and DomCode crossover meetup. I'm super excited to join with one of the other meetup groups in Utrecht. Who is here for Ode aan code? Can I see some hands? And who has never been to an Ode aan code meetup? Oh, that's nice. That's half of the audience. So let's do it the other way around. Who is here for DomCode? Wow. And who has never been to a DomCode meetup? That's a little less, but still a lot of people who have never been to one of the meetups. That's very nice. That works well. Welcome. I have a few important things before Jeroen will kick it off with his first presentation. The most important thing is the toilets. They are on the left, and then you go to the right. There's a door on the left side, directly to the right, then directly to the left, directly to the right again, and then you're there. It's in the stairway. That's a better explanation. Besides that, if you have any questions about this venue or about the meetup itself, you can come to me. I'm Jorolf. You can come to Oliver. That's a guy from DomCode as well. Where is Marit? There's Marit from Ode aan code. And we have, where are you? Now I forgot your name. I really forgot it. I sometimes, Ludo, yeah, that was it. Ludo from Ode aan code, I'm sorry. This is my bad. Then the one other thing that's very important is if you're going outside, no, you can go outside later today. So, Marit or someone else will open the door for you. Please don't open it with the handle, because if you do, the alarm will go off. And we are all in trouble. So, and if there's no one there, you can, of course, press the button to go outside, but make sure that no one else goes in, because apparently there have been not so nice people active in this area, and we want to keep them out of this building. Then I have a small thingy, the code of conduct. Be nice to each other. Don't discriminate. Don't do harassment. No aggressive recruitment or marketing. There is alcohol. If you, drink how much you want, that's fine. But if you think you've had a little bit too much, just let us know. We won't judge you, but we'd like to bring you home safe. So we will call you a cab or something. And it's a semi-professionalist feeling. So, feel free to joke around, but don't do anything dirty or weird or that is not supposed to be here. Then the agenda. Introduction, that's now. We're not seeing the slides. Oh, well, then I'll do it from the top of my head. Jeroen will start with a small talk about essential soft skills in tech. Well, small talk. Very long talk, actually, 40 minutes. We will have a small break after that at 8. And at 2020, we continue with a talk about OpenAPI, not OpenAI, OpenAPI to generate production-ready API clients by Sander. Then I think the last thing I want to say is I want to thank DEA Digital for hosting this, for having terrific food and drinks and a very nice atmosphere and even speakers and a microphone. This is much more than we usually have. So thank you, and give them a warm applause, please. And then I think it is time for Jeroen, who I've known for, I think, already 8 years or something. You've been in the community for a long time, being the community organizer for Utrecht ES. You're a home chef, a gamer, a developer, a CTO, living in Utrecht and working in Utrecht. I think you're an excellent speaker, that's why I invited you this time. Because he always pulls something unexpected from his sleeve. Give it up for Jeroen.
My own presentation will work. Let's see. Stand by, folks. Part 1.
Just to check, am I safe on the first row?
I don't know, are you? Am I safe here with you on the first row? Let's see, does this work? So, Knives make people listen. I want to talk about a lot of things, but I want to start with a little bit of cooking. As you can tell from the knives, I am a home chef. I'm not a professional chef, I'm a home chef. And these are the things that I tend to create at home. And I'd like to think that I'm, well, a pretty decent cook, that I have pretty decent core cooking skills, right? So I know how to use my various knives. If you're interested, later on, you can come ask me about them. I know about my kitchen appliances, about ingredients. My core skills are pretty much up to snuff, I would say. And I think that far, far, far more important than my cooking skills for my dishes is the fact that I am also nowadays pretty decent at small talk. So, you might wonder, why? Why is small talk important for cooking? So, I'm a cook, a gamer, a software developer, and this is what it looked like during the lockdown at our house. But luckily I live pretty close to my work at Infi, about a 5-minute bike ride, which is nice. So I'm in the office quite a lot nowadays, most of the days actually, because I enjoy it there. And this also is a little bridge to a shameless plug. I like to attend meetups. I'm part of the community for a long time already. So I wanted to plug for a short moment Advent of Code and the meetup that we have at Infi on 10th of December. Advent of Code is a puzzle for each day, and it's both fun and maddening. If you've done it before, then you probably know what I mean. And we puzzle together, so if you want to join up, feel free to do so December 10th. But anyways, at Infi, I am a CTO, but when I got the job, I made sure that I would also be programming still. I'm still an engineer, about 50-50 is the job. And I usually, most of the times when I get my yearly review, we get reviews from the colleagues that we choose, it's decently positive. And I'd like to think that that's the true positive feedback that I get, right? The actual feedback. I reckon that even though I'm pretty good at all the core engineering skills, it's not the engineering skills that help me get those positive reviews more so than small talk. I think small talk actually contributed more, my skills in small talk contributed more to my positive reviews than, let's say, knowing how to use C# is. Yeah, question? To the feedback talks, like, well, there's people in the audience that have given me feedback, so, okay, let's put that away for a second. Yeah, good reviews, right? Maybe they also bring knives or bigger knives. Good question. I will explain at the end. I will explain now that I don't bring knives to it's a safe space at Infi usually. But no, I will explain at the end why small talk is important for this technology. First, I want to do something about what is this presentation about, and let's start with you. So, who are you? Who here is a developer or a student to become one? Okay, most of the people. Who didn't raise his or her hand just now? 2, 3, 4, 5 people. User, can I ask you what your role is day to day? Manage a Windows service. Awesome. So that's also a pretty technical job. The other folks, are you also technical roles, or is anyone not from a technical role? There's 2 people that I know. I know this person, but tell the rest of the audience, what is your role? You are? He's my boss. So my boss is here. He doesn't have a knife. I have a knife. We're in the Netherlands, so we should be fine. Okay, so this presentation is mostly aimed at tech people. People in tech or working on tech day to day. But if you're not directly in tech, I think everything should be, at least in the middle part, also interesting to you. Which brings me to the structure of this presentation. So, first, the introduction, we're doing that right now. Then I'll go into the practical section. This is the soft skills that I think that are most important for your role as a techie. And then finally, we'll get back to the why. Why is all of this important? Why am I convincing you here to invest in those skills and not in your other core skills. So let's get to it. What are those essential soft skills? What are the things that I consider to be crucial to your job? Well, first, being evil. I think this is absolutely crucial. And there's a nuance there to being evil. I don't think you should be evil or do evil. I think you should know how to be evil. So a little anecdote. Let's see, it's a convoluted anecdote, so I got my notes here. Called into a product meeting, right? A software developer gets called into some kind of product meeting. Various product managers, product people in the room. Some desired feature gets explained briefly, and then that developer is pushed for an estimate. So she thinks for a second, she gives one, says, well, it will take roughly 80 hours, pretty confident of that estimate. And the response is as common as it is baffling. They will say something like, surely it cannot be that much. I think you underestimate your own skills. It's probably about half of that. We'll use 80 hours as an upper limit, but we'll write down 40. Right, so another show of hands, how many of you have been in something similar to that situation? Okay, about 2/3, bless the other 1/3. That's very nice. What I'm trying to tell you here is that to get better at your tech job, you have to be one of them in your mind. Don't be evil. Actually, don't do this, what I just told you in the anecdote. It's horrible. But you have to be aware of this. And if you are aware of this, then all the technology solutions that you build will actually reach production instead of being thrown out under pressure. Okay, so short nip of this. I expected this loud out of the... Now it came out after all. So a few resources that I used to get better at this skill. One of them is a book called Death March. Most of the books that I show here, by the way, are on the little table, so in the breaks you can have a look. Death March, that's where the anecdote I just told you came from, and it explains all these situations where people are being evil to techies in a way that you want to be prepared for. So know how to be evil. I personally enjoyed The Prince by Machiavelli. It has to be up your alley to read a book and then have to translate to modern times. That's something you have to enjoy, but I enjoyed it and it taught me a little bit about the tech world as well. And then finally, with strong caveats, Never Split the Difference. This is a book by an ex-FBI agent, and it has some, let's say, questionable procedures in that book, questionable things to do, which might be okay if you're in a hostage negotiation situation. I don't think most of those practices would be welcomed here at DomCode or DEI. But it helps to know that those practices exist and that they will be used against you. Because from this book, I've seen things that have been thrown at me as a techie. The recap of this is, and a little bit of the thread through this presentation would be, that you can build the best tech solutions in the world, but if evil parties block you along the way somehow with throwing crazy estimates at you, then you won't reach production with all that stuff. So know how to be evil is one of the crucial skills you can have as a software developer. On to the next one. If there's questions in between, by the way, feel free to interject, raise your hand. Next one is you have to know how to go undercover. So I want to give you a little bit of straight up advice. Next time you're going for that language tutorial or framework tutorial or tech conference, skip it. Skip that one and do something like this instead. For example, do a product owner training. You might not want to be a product owner, but knowing their role is super helpful. Go to a non-tech conference or meetup, obviously also very helpful. And then a tutorial for Figma or Adobe XD are designers' tools. If you're a front-ender, that's particularly helpful. A few books that are here as well. The non-designer's design book. I think most techies will like it because it gives you heuristics that you can use to make your front ends at least not ugly. If you're, for example, someone that doesn't have affinity with designing things. Or some maybe more of a product management style book. Sprint is about project management, and this one is about running a business and finding the why of your business. Both are here as well. Little anecdote, if you study for that new CSS grid feature, which might be very fancy and very nice, and you can build something cool with it, but you don't understand the designer that's working with you and that's using Figma and that might not have access to that feature yet in their UI, then all the technology skills in the world will not help you. It will never reach production if you don't understand the other role, and going undercover, trying a little bit of a taste of the other roles that you interact with is super crucial. So finally, for this skill is, there's never a logical time to go off the beaten path, right? You have to force yourself to go for that Figma tutorial and not for the language tutorial or whatever. All right, on to the next one, inbox management. And by this I mean like the fire hose of inbox, right? The fire hose of things, the emails, the direct messages, the alerts, the meetings, everything that comes at you. Our work is like being a fruit ninja, and our job is to make perfect straight up cuts through fruit. Right? The more perfect they are, the more well you have done your job. But the context of things is that everything is being thrown at you all the time, right? Most of the cases, for most of the people here, probably that's true. And knowing how to manage such an inbox, sorry, I have hear my own breathing too. I think that's crucial that you know how to do this. Now, I have a few resources that I have enjoyed, but there's a few caveats because a productivity system is very, very personal. So what works for me might not work for you, but what has worked for me, one with caveats, is 7 Habits. I enjoyed this book. I see a few people nodding. That's fun because they probably also are like me and enjoy that kind of book. Colleagues have done the Getting Things Done training or read the book, so that might be purely. I think I have a system that is similar to it, but I'm more of a self-taught kind of person. And then finally, this is now on my to-read list because when preparing this talk, I figured that that's closest to the system I already have, so I'm going to back up and try the theory. But the point here is, don't work without such a system. Find your system, find what works for you, but do find a system, because if you're getting drowned in all that fruit and getting bombs thrown at you, and you're trying to make perfect cuts through fruit, it's not going to work as well when you have a system. Okay. On to the next one. There's about, I don't even know how many I have exactly, about 8 or 9. Persuasion. So you have to be able to persuade people. If you build something super, super nice, and then you have to persuade the user to use it, or the product owner to actually, that it's worth the effort. Or you have to still persuade your teammates that have not gone to the OpenAPI talk here tonight, that thing is actually a really cool thing to use. So, yeah, there's many people you will have to persuade along the way that your solution is the one that is going to have to reach production. Okay, so a few resources that I've used to try and become more persuasive. I think maybe just before Corona, I did a course where this little book came in. Does anyone know this book, Made to Stick? Has anyone read it? Oh, anyone read this book? One person has read this book. So there's a big opportunity here, right? It's amazing because it also has heuristics for you. So you can take the rules from the book and try to implement them pretty strictly, and then all of a sudden people will start listening to you. It's amazing. I actually love it as a techie. More abstract is Influence, the Psychology of Persuasion. It's more of a cognitive psychology book. You still have to do that little translation in your mind from the stuff in this book to your work. But it's absolutely fantastic book. I don't have it with me, unfortunately, because it was gone, probably because someone borrowed it to read it, because I keep talking about it. And finally, yeah, there it is. Public speaking course is, actually Daniel did a public speaking course, my boss, that he recommended to me, and I don't actually even am on the stage that often, but the stuff that I've learned there helps me get the point across to that security officer that wants to like do 7 spreadsheets for one little field somewhere. That job is probably very important, but being persuasive in like, let's find a good solution that works for everyone, super helpful and probably worth more than that next language tutorial. Okay, so the next skill up is, I call it 2D list making, but I'm afraid there's a little confession time involved. It's either ignorant or arrogant or probably both, but it's a Jeroen original. I don't know what the theory is. When I started looking for it when preparing for this talk, I couldn't find much on the topic. So it makes sense that you've never heard of it before, but for me, this is one of the most important skills I have to do my work as a techie. Okay, so let's imagine this scenario. You have a task to complete for your core job, implement some kind of feature somewhere. Maybe you will know exactly where to start. If so, good. But the next time, maybe you will get stuck. Maybe somewhere along the way. Or maybe you don't even know where to start. And that's when this skill comes in handy, and we all get stuck once in a while, right? So the process for this skill is as follows. First step is get stuck, right? That's part of the scenario. The second step is pick 2 dimensions. I'll explain with concrete examples in a second what I mean by that, but you pick 2 dimensions. Well, let's go into the concrete example already. So for example, find all the stakeholders. That's one dimension. List the options for that dimension exhaustively. Then create a cross table, which makes sense, right? One dimension like this, one dimension like this. And then you have a big grid where you can just check off the cells exhaustively. And as technology people, we love like concrete heuristics where we can like follow a schedule or an algorithm and find a solution to things. And when you get stuck, this is absolutely amazing. The times when I see colleagues or friends or whatever trying to get unstuck with something and just try something here, and then try something there, and then try something here. Oh, that's something I've tried already. And you go around in circles and all that. If you have a process like this, I think it will work a lot better. And if you try to get better at this skill, it will help you so much. So the resources here are, well, I couldn't find any. But maybe, usually at these kind of talks, people will come at me afterwards and say, oh, there's this and this. But I guess I am your resource. ChatGPT, I did ask them today, which is, I guess, a compressed version of the internet. They came with morphological analysis and decision matrix analysis, which came close to this procedure, but I still think it's slightly different. But use it for what it's worth.
Also the image you get when you type in those words.
No, I actually, I don't even know. I typed in tumbleweed because I was like going to be like, so the question was, is this the image you get when you type in, I don't know, the morphological analysis, Morpheus, it's not air you're breathing. But no, that was the other way around. I was looking for an image of tumbleweed because, like tumbleweed, there's no resources, wind blowing, etc. But I got this image first, and then I took this image, I uploaded it to my phone, then I uploaded it to Gemini because I bought a Pixel and have a year's worth free of Gemini Pro. And then I told it to erase his face, and then I got this because I wanted to have this slideshow effect. Okay, going off the rails a little bit here. Next up, stress management. Some people going like this. Oh God, I don't want to talk about stress. I'm so stressed. Okay, little exercise time, all right? If you're comfortable doing so, close your eyes. Close your eyes, right? Imagine you are working on code or a test script. Feel free to mime the keyboard in the air. The keyboard is your air guitar. Code is flowing from your fingers. Keep coding, keep coding. And keep coding, keep working on that feature. You're typing, you're building the greatest thing in the world. All right, you can open your eyes now. So stress kills productivity, right? This is a cheeky version of of stress, just a baby crying, but a crying stakeholder, or evil estimates that are bothering you, or a phone that's ringing all the time. Stress kills productivity. You might be very, very good at your job. You might be doing that OpenAPI training next week, and then if you get hit by stress and you don't know how to manage it, it will kill you. And stress management, I think, is a skill. It's a skill we don't like to practice because stress is not fun, but I think it's useful to be good at it nonetheless. Okay, some bad news here. I am self-taught at stress management. I'm also not the best in the world, but I'm decent at stress management. I'm a stoic, so to say. I've read this as a bucket list item. It's actually not that great to use in your daily life. But being a stoic means that you try to only be affected by the things that you have influence over. And I don't think that's a system that will work for many people. So I don't have very good resources. Maybe at the end, at the Q&A, someone will be able to give good tips for stress management resources or trainings or whatever. But I do know, try to get better at it, because all the technology in the world won't save you if you're going to get a burnout, right? All right, getting there. Am I doing on time? Yeah, with 20 minutes should be fine. So mentorship and teaching. Actually, 5 years ago, I was on this stage at, I think, Localo at their original location, talking about how to learn new things. And I think one of those items, I know one of those items was the best way to learn something new is to mentor and teach someone else. I think that becoming better at mentoring and teaching is, well, for one, it's a thing that makes you very effective at learning something new yourself. So instead of learning that new language, commit to explaining it to other people, or commit to mentoring someone through that new framework, because then you will be learning much faster, I think. And I think that way it's like a life hack to improve your core skills while doing something else. And in the meantime, you're also mentoring someone, right? Making your team or your community a lot better. Here also, I have suggestions for some, but for this one, I don't have any. I don't know how to become a teacher other than just doing it and practicing it, which is, of course, a great thing to do, but not a resource. So if other people have suggestions, let me know afterwards. All right, 2 more to go. Next one, for me, something we really, really have to work on is empathy. And I'll start this one with a book recommendation. It's also there, a book called Against Empathy. So this author is against empathy. Actually, they're against general empathy. And they're pro something they call cognitive empathy, still with caveats. The reasoning there is that general empathy, where you try to feel what someone else feels, will lead to a lot of bias, a lot of tribalism, because you tend to be better at feeling what others feel if that person is very much like you. And that can be very hurtful. And there's all sorts of other things against empathy. Regardless of whether you agree, this book actually gave me some food for thought. So I recommend it highly to at least understand better what empathy is for you and for the industry as a whole. Okay, so empathy, I think we should discuss it in 2 ways. The first way is outward empathy, so outward towards stakeholders. For example, if you're someone who writes APIs, try to empathize with the person that's going to consume your API, right? You might write the perfect API in the world, but if the other person hates using it, then what have you done? All the perfectness in the world will not help you. If you're a front-ender, obviously you have to be very close to your end users. You have to empathize with your end users. If they get frustrated with the software, don't tell them they're using it wrong, right? I've been there doing that, but try to empathize with them, find out why they feel that way. And then the cognitive empathy part from that book is like rationally try to take a step back and consider really why they feel that way, instead of trying to feel their pain. Yeah, so outward empathy is towards stakeholders. No amount of coding effort will help you if you don't do this. then you might be creating stuff in a void. Inward empathy is more towards your colleagues and your teammates and your partners. And especially, I consider myself privileged in nearly all sorts of manners. I think then especially you have to make sure that you empathize with the people around you and not exclude folks from your team, from the community, etc. So some resources that help me with this that I really, really highly recommend. The first one is Culture Map. This is an amazing book. I wish I read that like 15 years ago when it came out. I only read it recently. It helps you explain different cultures in a very good way. Like as Dutch, we try to think we're direct. We like to think that we're direct, but actually some other cultures will perceive us as being rude. And the reasons why will be very clear from this book. So that's very helpful for interacting with other cultures. The next one is, this one is about racism and racial bias. It's a very American book. It talks a lot about slavery and whatnot. So consider if that's up your alley, but I thought it was very insightful and a little awkward to read as well. It has a lot of good information about intersectional inequalities as well, so where, for example, racism and sexism hit each other. And then finally, I didn't entirely like the writing style of the book, but the contents are very important, at least to me. So this book is in Dutch, talks about women in tech, which was very, very useful to read. And I'm sure there's various other resources as well. Okay, so 26 minutes in, right on schedule. There's one final soft skill I have to talk to you about. And if you've been paying attention and I've been falling asleep, you know it's going to be small talk. So I actually despised small talk. Well, I despised unfun small talk. What would happen if I was like approaching my home and I would see my neighbor standing near the elevator? I would be like, okay, I'm gonna like casually check messages I don't have to see if they're already gone, so I don't have to share an elevator with them and talk about the weather and mail and whatever they want to talk to me about. And that's the unfun kind of small talk. So the fix for this for me, I realized this was actually blocking me in some, and I tried to consciously actually work on this. The fix for me was being self-taught. And a little anecdote here is, that was already from maybe 18 years ago. The best way, if you want to do this as well, if you want to consciously practice small talk, I recommend doing it at the barber. They will ask you, ga je nog op vakantie? Are you going on vacation? I'm like, oh God. So here's what I did, right? People laughing, I was like, oh God, I have to go, my hair is this long, I have to go to the barber and I don't want to. So what I did when I had enough energy to do so is, they asked me this question and I said, a little prepared, yeah, I'm going 6 weeks to the Serengeti to shoot elephants and rhinos. And I was like, what the F? What the F is going on? I practiced like not losing my cool, so I made up a whole story about how I was going to shoot elephants and going to try to import them into the... By the way, don't do this, right? Elephants and rhinos are going extinct. Don't do this. It's not good. And I don't know if I would do it again. It's slightly, I guess, unethical to annoy your barber in this way or abuse the relationship you have with them. So maybe I wouldn't recommend taking that approach as I look back on it. But in general, try to consciously practice at it, or at least that was the way it worked for me. Now, I should clarify something. I hate small talk with, I don't think my neighbors are here. No, I hate small talk with my neighbors because it's unfun and about unfun topics. But small talk can be actually pretty cool. I had I was thinking of examples beforehand, and one thing I thought about is with my colleague Dirk, I talked about gelato and how temperature would affect the taste, and we tried to figure out how things melt on your tongue and all that. It was like the weirdest small talk ever, but it was fun. And along the way, I learned all sorts of things about chemistry because he knew little tidbits about that. And the same holds for technology, right? I enjoy being here. I enjoy small talk with y'all. And I can actually think of several instances where I was stuck during the day at work, and then at night I would be small talking with people, and I would like gather bits of information. And that's not even the main point, but along the way you would pick up things that will help you in your job. And the same holds for at your job, right? If you don't fear the small talk, but actually try to enjoy it a little bit, try to get a little better at it, which sounds weird, but getting better at small talk will help you at your job. Okay, so going into a recap. I wrote this down because if I was going fast, I'm going to skip to the slide and talk through all of them. But these are the ones we have just covered. And now we're finally going to circle back to why. Why are you telling me all this, right? It's like an assortment of soft skills that you tell me to get better at. I guess for most of them I agree. But why is it so important at a tech meetup? Why are we not talking about the latest version of PHP? For one, because I don't know PHP that well, but that's besides the point. In the presentation abstract, I promised you something like this. Improving essential non-tech skills, soft skills, is the most effective way to improve at your tech job. And that raises two sub-questions. Why these skills? And why invest in them over any core skills? So let me use an example to explain why I've asked you to spend 27 minutes with me to go over these soft skills. Let's take an example task. You are tasked to auto-generate API clients for the fruit API. Some party has a fruit API and you have to have clients for that. So let's consider this is create feature, right? This is everything you have to do within your core skills that you consider, okay, my work here is done, I have programmed the feature, you have also helped test it, release it, etc. But that's not the only thing involved in your work. That might be the core task, but it's not your work, it's not your job. The picture is bigger. I don't know if everything is visible, but I'll explain a little while I point at it. It's like a chart where you have different paths that feature will take towards success, and there's all sorts of hurdles here. And I've written down a few example hurdles that, they line up perfectly with the soft skills that I recommend. Let's consider this specific path. So you're tasked to create that feature, but let's go through some typical hurdles. The first one is you're working under an evil estimate that someone else put you on the pressure for, that's when you have to finish it, even though that might not be realistic. Then the feature, the API clients, will still need some persuasion because you've been to this cool meetup where you've learned a new way to do this, but they haven't. How are you going to explain and persuade them to do this? And then finally, let's use a little anecdote that I've actually seen happen. You had a perfect teammate for pair programming, but some other teammate was always making women-friendly jokes, like misogynistic jokes, right? And that teammate, they gave up. No one said anything and they left. No one empathized enough to speak out against those jokes. So you lack this perfect pair programming experience because you didn't have enough empathy as a team for that situation, for the person that was affected. So we're programmers, so let's do a tiny bit of code in this presentation. It's a little small. Let's say the base chance of success, you're pretty good at your job, is 1.0, right? 1.0 that you're gonna hit success. You're pretty confident that you can do this. But then the evilness will chip off 30%, persuasion, chip off another 10%, empathy will chip off, in this case, let's say another 20%. So if we use this little funny example, the chance of success becomes a little small if you multiply these 0.504, so 50.4% chance of success. This is not like rock solid scientific work, but it's the mental model that I have when I think about how does something that I built actually reach success. So let's think about that you've just read up on the latest language features. Your base chance increases by 2% because it's your core skill. You're already pretty good at it. You're shaving off, or you're shaving on, I guess, a little extra percentage by getting a little better at your job, but you won't make huge strides anymore. So what happens if you increase your core skills by 2%? You end up with 51.4%, so 1% increase in chance. That's not a lot. You can make bigger steps, I think, with those soft skills. So let's say you increase this 0.7 to 0.96, you really invested a year long on facing the evil guys. You get really good at it. You're not at 1.0, right? You're not at a base level that most people are in businesses across the world, but you're pretty good at it. And what happens now is the base chance of success becomes 69%. Nice. These are wobbly statistics, right? super, super wobbly. But I think the idea is sound, and I hope most of you would agree with me, and I hope that those that don't will come to talk to me and explain to me why. I think that improving your core skills will face diminishing returns pretty quickly. And secondary skills often won't. Now, it's more fun to increase your core skills, right? You chose this job probably for a reason. But in general, if you want to get more effective at your job, that's when I think you should choose secondary skills, soft skills, over core skills a lot of the time. Because honing those secondary skills, that is probably the most effective way to become better at your job. And if that's your goal, then that's the only conclusion that I can reach. Thank you, that's it. We're at 36 minutes, so I think there's probably time for questions. There's a mic there, so it's not the kind of, how does this work? So maybe there is not questions, but if there's suggestions, I also welcome them, like for resources or anecdotes or whatever. And if there's not, that's also fine. All the way in the back.
Hello.
It's on. Yeah.
Yeah? Okay, cool. Why is listening not on it?
So the question is, why is listening not on there? Very good. I came prepared. I was afraid I was going to go through too quickly, so I didn't include it in the main presentation. I think some of these skills are like, I would call them cross-functional skills, and listening, yes, scored. I know that guy, but it's not coordinated. So writing, talking, listening, patience. Listening is also involved in your core skills, right? If you're busy with a feature, pair programming you would probably consider part of your core tasks. So listening is a skill that's like cross-functional. I think it's very important. I think it's super worthy to become better at listening, at active listening, etc. I don't think it's a thing that you have to step out of your way of to do as with the other secondary skills. But it's very important for sure. Does it answer your question? Does it raise new questions? Yes. It answers the question, good. Or no. There's a question over there in the corner. Yeah.
Do you consider the evil like motivated by malice, or would you also include like stressful situations where maybe like stress topples down, you know, in high pressure environments, and then people maybe become a little bit unpleasant?
Yeah. So the question, as I understood it, is: do you consider it being evil and coping with that only for scenarios where people are purposely or actively evil? No. I think that becoming better at dealing with evil situations is probably a better way to describe it than people that are being explicitly evil to you. And the example that you gave is very good, actually, because stress trickles down, like trickle-down economy with stress, and then it ends up at the coding work floor, and then you get like evil or bad situations and being able to deal with that. But then you also do get a little into the stress management thing as well. But sometimes people are like evil without knowing it or forced to be evil. And a good way to deal with some kind of evil people is like, there's a crossover with empathy again, right? Why are they being evil? And not like feel their rage, because then you become raged yourself. No, understand and empathize with them in what is the pressure they deal with, and learn how to deal with that. But I do see the reason that coping with it is on my list as one of the most important things to learn how to do is the knee-jerk reaction most people have when people are evil to you is like to either fight or flight. So either you'll be like, oh, the estimate, I don't know, or that like ringing phone that I don't want to ask them to turn off. They're not purposely being evil by letting their phone ring. They might have like a ton of things to do. Yeah, learning how to deal with that is very important. Yeah, good question. Other questions? Over there. Exercise.
Yeah, I have a suggestion for a resource. If you don't like going through the books of Marcus Aurelius or Seneca, and you do want to learn about Stoicism, then maybe buy the book Daily Stoic. It's a book by Ryan Holiday. 365 tiny little stories about Stoicism.
Daily Stoic?
Daily Stoic, yeah.
Okay, gonna look it up in there. Daily Stoic, very good suggestion. Right, if there's nothing else, then, oh, there's one more question. No, that's fine. We have like 9 minutes left. We can also go into a break.
Yeah, I have a question about the mentorship and teaching.
Yeah.
I always think of myself, I need to have these kind of skills before I can do mentorship or teaching.
Yeah.
If I hear you out, it's not really the case, but what do you suggest?
Yeah, so the question, as I understand it, is becoming a mentor can be daunting, and you, especially if you ask a lot of yourself, you'll be like, no, I have to be perfect at this, like exaggerating your question a little bit. You have to be perfect at this before you become a mentor. So first, answering that question, how did that happen for me? I have had nearly all the privilege in the world, so my reaction to that situation was, fuck it, I know how to do it, and I'll just go at it. So that's not a good suggestion for people that are not in that situation where you like have that unwarranted confidence. I think, yeah, there's a suggestion here actually from someone in the audience, so.
So I'm the next speaker, and I get a lot of questions like at work from like juniors or like people, interns, like, hey, like I also want to give talks, but I have nothing to talk about and stuff like this. And it's kind of the same vein. Like I want to teach people stuff, but I have no idea what to teach them. And then I'm like, so kind of what kind of stuff did you do in school? Yeah, just like C# or web development, a little bit of AI. I'm like, I know nothing about AI. Like you are the senior in this room when it comes to AI. And he's like, yeah, but I don't know how to do this stuff. But I'm like, you know more than me.
Yeah.
I could learn from you on this. Or the same thing like, we could both know C# or Java or whatever, but your take on it, your thoughts can be very, very interesting to see like how you think about software development. I can learn a whole lot of things from that. So even if you know the same thing or less than someone else, you can still teach them a lot of interesting things.
Yeah, fantastic remarks, and that makes me realize that's a small bit of advice to the people that find becoming a teacher daunting. And the advice you just gave is actually advice for the people that are like privileged enough to being a mentor already. You should tell other people that you think can mentor others that they can mentor others, right? Lend them your confidence. So I would, if I would be working closely with you, and you like said that at some point, I want to be a mentor, but I don't know if I'm ready for it. The answer to that solution probably does not mostly lie with you, but with the people that can lend you their confidence. So yeah, but good suggestion. And I think if you are like on the cusp of it, maybe this is the little push you need. If you're asking the question whether am I ready for mentoring yet, the answer is probably yes.
I would like to add one other suggestion. I think that in a sense, perfect can be the enemy of good here. I mean, if you mentorship and teaching sounds really daunting, but there has to be something that you know that you are better at than most of the people around you. Maybe your recent project involves you using a certain attribute a lot, and nobody else uses that attribute. Maybe you have to type a lot of semicolons, and you're really good at it. But I believe if you're prepared to go down to a micro level, there is a certain skill, something that you are more experienced in than your colleagues, and that is something you can offer them. And if you replace, if you see mentorship and teaching as the end goal, and you say the step towards that is explaining something to somebody else that they do not yet know as well as you do, then I think you've taken an important step. So maybe don't make it too big, but find that little thing that you know that the people around you don't know as well as you do, and that seems to me to be the first step.
Yeah, start small. Yeah, good suggestion. Anything else? Then you're in charge for what's next.
We're gonna go for a short break, get a drink, and I think we'll be back in 15 minutes or so, 20 minutes. I'll call you when it's time. I'm not scared. All right. Whilst you're all getting back to your seats, I want to announce our next speaker, Sander ten Brinke, who's going to talk to us about from manual to automatic using OpenAPI to generate production-ready API clients. That's nice. That's a nice ring to it. Yeah, it's a nice title. Sander has a passion for cutting-edge technology. That's a lot of words. I also read that you do C#, Python, PHP, and Java, so I think you're a polyglot.
I do a lot of things.
Yeah, see? Yeah, so he's the polyglot. There's the polyglot. And you speak as a guest and a co-host in podcasts.
Correct.
Super nice. Thanks for being here. And, well, let's enjoy your talk. Give it up for Sander.
All right. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for the warm welcome. So I'm Sander ten Brinke. This is actually my second time speaking at an Ode aan de Code event. The last time was like a year ago, maybe a year and a half. I spoke about HOS in Apeldoorn. Jeroen had the better intro with bringing out knives. I didn't bring a weapon to this meetup. I do always bring some gifts. Stickers! So I have stickers here. I have stickers there where the books are. I have stickers all over the bar. People love stickers. I don't really care about them, so I just give them away. So if you like stickers, have a look at after the session, and yeah, just enjoy them. So today I am here to talk about OpenAPI, which really changed the way that I, well, basically approach API development, the way I look at APIs, the way I use them. And why? Well, because building APIs and building API clients actually have a couple of problems. Of course, there's tons of problems, otherwise we wouldn't be doing all of this. But most importantly to me is the problem of managing these APIs and API clients by hand. And we're going to talk a whole lot about these problems today. So with OpenAPI, you can do a whole lot of things, which we'll also talk about. But for me, most importantly is managing and creating, well, production-ready API clients, just generating them instead of writing them by hand. And this is just a whole lot more fun, because having to write these things by hand is just boring, it's error-prone, and we just like to do more fun things. So let's just start talking about this. Okay, so again, I'm Sander ten Brinke. I'm a senior software engineer and knowledge officer at Arcadie. So Arcadie is a software consultancy company based in Zwolle. I do a whole lot of things with .NET and C#. I believe I'm in the minority here. Any other .NET or C# developers? Oh, actually, I didn't expect that. The silent majority, exactly. All right, so I do a whole lot of things with .NET and C#. I don't actively use PHP or Java, but I have worked with them in the past. I can work with them, but I think everyone has their favorite programming language. Mine is C#. But as you can see, I also do a whole lot of different things, right? I've done app development, cloud, DevOps, front end. I do everything except for CSS. I can't stand it. Okay. Ooh. I actually just learned that DomCode is a web development thing. So I love CSS. Right. I also do a lot of speaking, podcasting, blogging. I'm a Microsoft MVP. So yeah, that's really fun stuff for me. If you want to learn more about me, follow these links. You'll also find them at the end of the presentation. But you're not here to learn about me. Would be fun. But actually, you're here to learn about OpenAPI. So today we're going to talk about 4 different topics, really, to get to the end. So first we're going to talk about the problems with building APIs. Then we're going to talk about OpenAPI and what it actually is. Then we're going to do a little demo. Then we're going to generate API clients, which is going to be really fun. And hopefully you don't want to go back after knowing how all of that works. And finally, there's conclusions, some resources, some questions, and etc. If you have any questions, just feel free to interrupt, feel free to ask questions. If you're like, oh, actually, I know fun other ways to do this, or actually, you're wrong. Please tell me, that's always fun. So just let's make this an interactive session. Just don't boo me, okay? Great. So before we talk about the problems of building APIs, let's actually talk about what an API client is, so we're all on the same page. So to me, an API client is a set of classes or some way of organized code that encapsulates logic and models for API communication. It's a good idea to kind of do these things in separate classes or in a separate layer, because at some point, if you're not going to do this, you're going to have HTTP logic just all over the place in your application. And it is just really nice to have like a user client class that you can just call get users on. And under the hood, this will do all the HTTP logic, all the authorization, the serialization, deserialization, the paths, error handling, status codes. There's lots of stuff, and you can just kind of wrap that away in a class. Really useful. I think who here, well, doesn't use API clients? Who here just has HTTP logic all over the place? Good. No one. See? API clients are great. So what are the problems then with actually building APIs? And APIs can be lots of things. So I'm just going to talk about like HTTP APIs here, or you might call them REST APIs. It's a whole discussion. Let's not get into what a REST API definition actually is. Let's just talk about kind of like an HTTP API, usually returns JSON, you know, the modern stuff we're building. So a client can do like an HTTP request to a server, and this server will return JSON, and then the client will consume it, show a fancy list page, and whatever. But there are a couple of problems with this approach that I encounter quite often, and I'm very curious to hear if you encounter these as well. So just for the sake of time, I'm going to talk about two of them. The first one is actually managing multiple clients. And to me, this is already a problem when I have one client. But let's just assume the scenario of having like 4 clients here. Right? So we have an API written in, and I just kind of have to guess the audience here, Java, JavaScript. What else? Anything else? Any other favorite programming languages here that I didn't mention? Ruby. Okay, I've not heard that one in a while, but Ruby is fine. Okay, so we have an API written in Ruby. And then we're going to have several of the clients, right? So we might have like a web client written in React, an iOS app written in Swift or Objective-C, an Android app written in Java, maybe in Kotlin, and maybe another server that's actually consuming this API written in C#. So the problem here is that we're going to have to write like separate API clients for each language and for each like app or framework. So that's going to be really boring, like writing a user client in every little thing, deserializing, serializing, dealing with errors, dealing with HTTP stuff 4 times is not really fun, especially in a team setting, right? You're going to have to communicate, and you're going to have to share some logic. The server updates, the API changes, and you need to update 4 clients. Just doing this all is just kind of bothersome. And I also don't like doing it just for one client, because it's just a whole lot of boring work. The next problem is that API definitions are usually not kept in sync when you do these things by hand. For example, let's say we have, this is going to be C# and TypeScript, but I think everyone is probably able to read this. If not, let me know. But let's say we have an order class in our API, right, with an ID, a user ID, and then maybe like an order date. And then we're going to build an API client in TypeScript that's going to be an interface order with an ID, a user ID, and an order date as well. And this is all good. This is all fine, living life. And at some point, we're going to have to deliver new features, right? So we're going to, for example, say we're going to add a delivery date. But the delivery date is actually nullable, right? Meaning that it doesn't always have a value. It can be optional. For example, we place an order, and the delivery date can't be determined immediately. Maybe it takes a couple minutes, maybe whatever. So it needs to also support not having a value. We code that in C#. And maybe the front-end developer writing this in TypeScript, maybe they're not familiar with C#. Maybe they just misread, right? There's little question mark here. Or maybe just some miscommunication happens, and they implement it as a delivery date with the type date, non-nullable, so it should always have a value. It's a really small mistake to make, but now at runtime we're going to get issues, right? We're going to get null reference issues, we're going to get undefined issues, because the code will always think, and the compiler or the transpiler will always think that there is a value, when that is not the case. Now, this is a little bit like dramatized or something like that, but this kind of stuff can happen over time. It's going to cause drift. The more complex your API is, the more clients you have, the more little mistakes you're going to make by hand. Another really good example of this is, for example, naming. Maybe you're calling this order in the API, you're calling it bestelling in Dutch in the front end, and then kind of finding the similar bits of code that belong to the front end and the back end is going to be a lot more difficult. Anyone here anyone here not familiar with these kind of issues? See, I got a audience that agrees. That's great. So those are kind of annoying issues to have to deal with. And we're going to fix this with OpenAPI. So what is OpenAPI? What does it look like, and what can you do with it? So OpenAPI is a standard for designing, building, and documenting your APIs. Is anyone here familiar with this kind of UI here? See, a load of people. That's great, that's great. So this is not going to be a lot of surprises to you, unless you've never really dove into what of these documents is. We're going to do it anyway for people unfamiliar. Might just be a little, freshening up lesson. But, well, APIs can be complex, right? And every framework implements APIs in their own way, right? You have ASP.NET Core, we have Spring Boot, Ruby on Rails, I remembered that one, Django. So having a standard that will describe how an API works, what paths are available, request responsibilities, headers, all that kind of stuff, status codes, is really useful because we can all talk about the same thing and imagine how we would write it in our favorite language of choice. So OpenAPI is exactly this. It's language and framework agnostic. This can work with any framework and language of choice. You can describe one of these documents in YAML or JSON. In this presentation, we're going to do YAML because it works better on the slides. I don't prefer YAML. YAML stands for yelling at my laptop when you actually have to work with it. And yeah, I don't recommend it. So OpenAPI is used by a whole lot of companies. There's actually like a whole initiative and kind of thing around it, like from the OpenAPI initiative. There's like companies working together to set up the newest versions of it and everything. And yeah, you can get a whole lot of tooling with this, which we're going to talk about later. For now, a little bit of history. I just asked who knows OpenAPI. Is there anyone here that had not heard of OpenAPI but have heard of Swagger? Yeah, see, that's great. It's always fun to see. Okay, so sometimes I talk people about this, and then they're like, OpenAPI, they don't hear it, and then I show them like this page, and they're like, oh, and that's Swagger, that's Swagger. You're technically right. Like, it was created in 2011, and it was called Swagger, Swagger 1.0, and in 2014 it was upgraded to Swagger 2, and then in 2015 they're like, hey, we're doing something pretty smart here. Why don't we create like the OpenAPI initiative? We're kind of donating it away to committees, and that's what they did. In 2017, they released OpenAPI 3, which is kind of the most popular version of the spec. And then in 2021, they came out with OpenAPI 3.1. Funnily enough, the beginning of this year, I gave this talk at BitBash, if you've maybe been there or not. And then the internet said, well, they're coming out with OpenAPI 4 Moonwalk at some point. So I was like, I don't know when. And I just looked it up yesterday, and it said end of this year. I've not heard anything or seen anything about this on the internet, but it should come out in the next 4 weeks. I think that might have been an evil estimate. But you gave me a reference, I'm referencing you back. All right, so why did I mark this one in gold? Because OpenAPI 3 is kind of the most popular version. We're going to talk a little bit about tooling, we're going to show you a little bit of that stuff, and OpenAPI 3, even though it's not the newest, is the one you'll find most in the wild. And OpenAPI 3.1 doesn't add a whole lot of interesting features for the average API. So you might investigate it yourself. So what we're going to do now is we're going to dive into one of these sample specifications. Maybe you will, how do you say that? Why do I do this? Because usually people really like learning technologies, but I think it's really important to, when you learn a tool, that you actually understand how it works under the hood. So I could teach you all about API client generators and how easy it is with a press of a button when you have an API to get API clients and super cool tooling. But if you don't really know how it works under the hood, anything goes wrong and you're kind of in the dark. So kind of learning how stuff works under the hood, maybe with your favorite framework or your favorite library, can be really, really useful. So an OpenAPI spec is basically divided into several, well, sections, really. So we have an info, kind of like metadata with some server information, some external docs. Then there's the paths, and the paths are like the meat and the potatoes, so they're the endpoints. And that will contain like request and responsibilities, possible status codes that you can return, header information that is required to send. And there's also components, and the components are usually the things where you store your schemas, like your objects you're returning. Like you're returning a talk object with like an ID, a speaker ID, a time. That kind of stuff is usually stored in components. So what does this look like? Is this readable in the back for everyone? Yeah, it's good. Thank you very much. Okay, so let's talk about a conference API, right? So let's say that we have to build an OpenAPI specification for a conference API. So what would that look like? Well, we're going to start at the top. This is going to be an OpenAPI version 3. There's going to be a little bit of info, right? So there's going to be a talk with title conference API. This is going to be an API for managing conference talks. There's some contact information in case you have questions. So you can contact me. There's a version of the document, version 1. Maybe you've written some external docs, like some extra API information, some extra API docs, and you can find that at example.com/docs. Really useful for people to find a little bit more information about your API. You, of course, can also have things like servers, which is really underused. I think this is really useful, because here you can specify all the different environments you have. For example, the dev, the test, staging, prod. Usually when I find like an API and I want to find out what all the test environment URLs are, it's kind of a pain in the butt. But having like a document with all of the URLs in it, really useful. So this is basically stuff you will find all the time in an OpenAPI spec. This is not everything. We're not going to talk about every little property, because honestly, it would be really boring. But these are the most useful ones. Next, there's going to be paths. So these are the endpoints, right? So here we can see we have an endpoint /talks, which supports both a get and a post. So we can do HTTP post to /talks and HTTP get. So what happens if we go to get? Well, it is grouped under the talks tag, which is just a way to group endpoints together. And the summary, well, you get a list of talks. The operation ID would be talks _ get talks, which is kind of its unique ID in your entire schema. And there's going to be some responses as well on the next slide. You can also create a new talk by doing a post, which is going to, create a new talk. And this is also going to need you to send a request body, right? So there's differences between responses and requests. So requests and responses. Let's say we're creating a new talk. Let's say we're talking about OpenAPI. So we're going to submit a new talk. So what would that look like? The request body, well, it is required. So we're going to specify that this is required or not. The content needs to be application JSON. That's what we accept. So we could also say application XML, or we can do both. Some APIs actually prefer to both accept JSON and XML these days. Well, that's possible if you just add more of them to this list. And then you see a schema reference to hashtag component schemas talk. So this is basically kind of like a pointer to those components I mentioned earlier, where you can set up the way that your request bodies look like, or your response bodies. At some point, you're going to create this talk, and you're going to get a response back from the server. So here we can describe all of the different responses we can get. And this is not working anymore. Wait a second. It is not working anymore, but that's fine. I don't know. It's not working anymore. That's fine. So we can get a response 201, like 201 created. You could also add more responses. It would be useful to maybe get like a 400 bad request, a 500 internal server error. A lot easier to understand what they're doing and what you're supposed to do. Okay, so that's an OpenAPI spec. Are there any questions about that so far? Yeah, in the back.
So specify if there's like a custom header name for, let's say, an API key.
That's a good question. So is there a way to like specify a custom way, a custom header name, for example? I'm not sure if there's a built-in security scheme for that. Maybe API key auth, probably be it, because bearer auth is probably that. I think it's going to be API key auth. And one of the things I didn't talk about is that like an endpoint can also have headers. So then you probably reference that somehow, or you reference the security scheme here, and the security scheme has headers. All right. So then there's the way of building a specification, and there's basically two approaches. The first approach is design first, which is what we just kind of did, right? We sit down with the team, and we're going to build a new microservice for something, for like the order system, or maybe the conference API. Let's just keep it at that. So we're going to sit down, create an OpenAPI document, and then we're going to implement a server based on that document. In fact, there's actually tooling available for OpenAPI that will generate the server code based on the document. So you, in a perfect world, because I don't recommend this, but in a perfect world, you could say, well, today I'm going to have a Java API, and then tomorrow we're suddenly switching to like Ruby, and then you can just put this in a server code generator, and then it will just, you'll get a Ruby on Rails application out of it. I don't really use that because those tools don't really exist in a perfect world. Like the code is not very clean, the code is not very maintainable, it will not just randomly generate database code for you, usually. So I actually prefer a code-first approach. Kind of depends on the environment that you're working in. Like I work a lot with .NET, where the code-first approach is a lot more preferred. But maybe in the world where you work, design first is more preferred. But the code-first approach definitely has a benefit, because if you do design first and then write the API yourself, you need to be really sure that you're writing the API correctly according to the spec. With a code-first approach, you're just writing your API. So this is going to be C# code. So you have a method, for example, HTTP get, and this method is going to return an IEnumerable of talk, which is like a list of talks. And well, it's going to go to a repository, get some talks, and then return OK talks. And this would then generate this OpenAPI document for you based on that code. It's a lot easier to work with, especially if you have an existing code base. You can just plug in some OpenAPI library and you're just done. So that's the easiest way to get started. Okay, so I mentioned tooling a few times already. So if you go to a website called https://openapi.tools, there's going to be a list of like 350 tools available for you, because it's an open standard, it's really easy to generate tooling for it. And please don't read everything on this page, you're going to be here for a while. Let's just point out the most important things. So the most cool thing to me is API client generators, which is kind of what you're here for. Then there's also API server generators, which again, in a perfect world, is really, really of a cool idea. You can just work in a language agnostic way, but it doesn't work well. Then there's documentation, so you can just generate documentation from your API so you don't have to write it yourself. You know, sometime you need to write it, but it is quite nice that it exists. There's mock servers. Mock servers are really, really interesting. So I hope that you haven't heard of them, because I'm going to hopefully blow your mind a little bit. Yeah, sorry, I had to drink something for that. Okay, you ready? Okay, so a mock server. So imagine that you're building a new list page to display conference talks, right? So you're probably, well, you're working on this, you're creating the UI, and at some point you're going to have to like inject data into this page. But the server is not ready yet. So the server is made by a different team. So you're just going to be like, well, probably the schema is going to be like this kind of object, this kind of class. So you're just going to create it with a talk ID and a talk name or whatever. And then you're just going to create some fake data and display it on the page. And then at that point, you're going to wait. The server is going to be ready. You're going to change your code to actually do some API calls. And then, update your schema and then be done. But maybe there's a problem. Maybe your imagined schema is going to be completely different than the API implementation, which is going to make you redo a whole lot of work. So what is a mock server and what can it help you here? Well, what you could do is you could now sit down with someone from the backend team, or maybe from your other team or whatever, with the backend person that's going to write the API. And you're going to say, why don't we sit down and just create the OpenAPI spec for this, or update the OpenAPI spec with this new endpoint? You're going to do that, and you're going to maybe end up with like, well, something like this, right? And now what you can do with a mock server is you can tell, like Prism is a tool for this. You can tell Prism, here's my OpenAPI spec. And it'll be like, okay, great. And then it will actually run like a fake server in your terminal that you can now talk to. So now you could go to like a localhost like 5006/API/talks, and it will actually return data based on your exact OpenAPI schema. Really interesting. Because now, at some point, the server is going to be done. We just need to point our URL away from localhost and to the dev environment, and everything is guaranteed to work, because both things implement the same OpenAPI schema. And it's also just really fun to just have a mock server that isn't a real server return fake data for you. I think it's a really interesting approach when there's a little bit of a silo between front-end and back-end development. There's also validator tooling available to you, so you can like validate your spec based on your implementation, or just validate the spec you've created. And there's also things like API testing. So there's going to be tools that are going to look at your OpenAPI spec and then maybe even find some vulnerabilities based on the data that you consume or return. Loads of tooling. So why don't we take a look at some of this tooling? Okay, so let me change my screen here. There we go. Yeah. Okay, let me know, do I need to increase the font size a little bit in the back? I see someone squinting, so that's probably a yes. Is this better? Yeah. Thank you, okay. So here we have basically the same conference OpenAPI YAML document again. And kind of what I want to show to you is not all the tooling, because we're going to be here forever. I'm going to show you the tooling that you might have already seen, or the ones that might convince you to use OpenAPI just based on these things. So let's say we have an OpenAPI document. So what you can do is something called Swagger UI. Let me just turn off my dark mode. So Swagger UI, is someone here unfamiliar with this kind of UI? No one. Okay, well, you already know this. So you can like see all of the endpoints. You can take a look at all of the responses, all of the different status codes. You can try out your endpoints. It's going to be really cool because it's going to now tell us, well, it's unauthorized. You can't perform this call because I actually set it up with security. So I need to authorize it either with OAuth2 or with an API key. And this all works really well. So this is going to be just a fake demo. So let's just say that I have an OAuth2 client ID, which is going to be this, and the secret is going to be this. And we want to authorize with these two. I don't have internet. I didn't think about the fact that I wouldn't have Wi-Fi. You can see here that it would actually go to like the Microsoft login page for you locally, and return a token, which you then can use, with the Swagger UI thing, which is really, really useful. Another approach, like there's another tooling available to you, which is just called Redocly. It's kind of the same thing, but now you have like a 3-lane layout. So we have talks here, you have your API here, and you have like some more information here. And one more thing I want to talk to you here about is you could also get this spec. Let's have a look here. You can get this. This is your YAML. This is your document. You can get this. You can throw it into Postman if you're using Postman for this kind of stuff. And Postman will generate all of the requests and the responses and all the security information for you because it supports OpenAPI. There's a lot of tooling available to you to make your life easier when you're working with an API. What else is there for me to tell you? Let me have a look at what else. Well, I wanted to tell you. Yeah, basically, that's everything here. So you're already kind of familiar with OpenAPI, with Swagger UI, so I think it's time that we just continue. Let's have a look at this. Yes, okay. So next, I want to talk about... it's not working. There you go, generating API clients. Any questions so far? Good, okay. So, generating API clients. A quick recap. There were kind of two problems I talked about, right? So managing multiple clients that you have to maybe create and update and maintain with different programming languages. And then there's the problem of keeping them in sync. So when the server changes, you have to keep your API client perfectly in sync, because the second it's like wrong, it's going to be really annoying and you're going to get really annoying bugs. So the way we fix this is by using code generation, right? So code generation, what is this? Code generation is simply the fact of generating code, usually based on the specification, based on the standard, because that's what computers like, and we want to make the computers happy. And the way why you want to use this is because if you can just generate your API client based on some sort of spec, right, OpenAPI, then you don't have to write this manual stuff anymore. I kind of noticed that all of the talks I give at conferences are about like removing duplicate code, just removing boring work, and I think that's why I just really like this kind of stuff. So if you're not having to write that kind of stuff, if you can just generate the stuff, you can just do a whole lot more fun work. And luckily with OpenAPI, it's really simple to get started with code generation. So there's basically any language under the sun is supported. Kotlin, C#, Swift, Ruby, like the entire front-end language and framework and landscape, Python, Java, Go, PHP, and so many more are available. So let's talk about a couple of popular generators. So the one I like the most, but this is of course from me coming from the .NET and C# background, it's going to be nswag. Considering that the minority here does not support, I see someone doing the thumbs up. You like it? You know it? Awesome, awesome. We have one fan already. So considering that the .NET people here are in the minority, we're going to also talk a little bit about Kyoda, and I'm just going to quickly talk about OpenAPI generator. So Kyoda is Microsoft's OpenAPI client generator. And it basically supports tons and tons of languages. So, well, I think I wrote it down here. So C#, TypeScript, JavaScript, Go, Java, PHP, Python, Ruby, Swift, and just so many more. Yeah.
What does the difference mean between API client languages and API server languages? Because C# is on both sides.
Yeah. So API client languages means that this tool is available to generate API clients for you. And API server means that this tool is also able to generate servers or part of servers for you based on the spec. So in this case, nswag does support generating controllers for you in C#, but the quality is kind of bad. And if you're going to take a look at OpenAPI generator, it supports any language under the sun. Like, yeah.
Is it enterprise only, or is it for hobby projects? Like, how do you access these tools?
Right. So we're gonna. How do you access these tools and that kind of stuff? So they're all free. They're all open source. And in the next few slides, I'm going to talk to you all about that. I'm going to give you a couple of demos. So if you have any more questions about that afterwards, please let me know. All right. So OpenAPI Generator is also a really popular one in the community. The reason why I don't really have a slide or a demo for it immediately is because I don't really use it in production. But I did try it out a few times, and it's actually really, really fun. Where these tools will simply just generate client code for you for one of these languages. OpenAPI Generator will also like generate docs for you and like tons and tons of stuff that you can just publish and then put it in a package, and it makes it really fun. So I definitely check out all of these. Check out OpenAPI tools and the client generator section, and just take a look at what your favorite is, because there isn't a bad answer. We're automating boring stuff. It's always good. So NSWAG. NSWAG is a community-made tool. There's more like 50 million downloads. And like I said, you can use it to generate C# and TypeScript API clients. You can generate C# controllers. Don't recommend it. And for people that are using Visual Studio, if you have actually used Visual Studio and then connected services and then generate API client, this is actually using NSWAG under the hood. The fun thing about NSWAG is that you can actually use it in multiple ways. So you can use it with the CLI. You can use it with the GUI, which is NSWAG Studio. It only works on Windows as far as I know. But it's a really fun way to start using OpenAPI, because you can just click on everything and configure everything the way you want. You can immediately get some feedback. Really fun. You can also use it with MS Build if you're using .NET, and that's .NET's build system. There's Kyoda. So Kyoda is made by Microsoft. Anyone here familiar with Microsoft Graph? 1, 2 hands. The boss.
Azure Access, that's the Azure API platform, right?
Yeah, exactly. So I'm not going to go too deep into this, considering only 2 people know it. So Microsoft Graph is basically Microsoft's entry point to anything Microsoft data. So you can perform a query to Microsoft Graph, like an API call, to manage your emails, to manage your calendar, to manage your tenant settings, to manage your tenant's security and virus scan software settings, just anything around the Microsoft and Azure platform you can do with using Microsoft Graph. So Microsoft manages this giant API, and they had a problem because they want to provide an excellent API client experience to tons of languages, because any language should be able to use their API. So they created Kyoda. So Kyoda is another tool that you can use to generate API clients, but it supports like tons of languages. The cool thing, or the opinionized thing about Kyoda, is that it will kind of generate the APIs in the exact same way for each language. So if you can generate a client with like PHP, it will look the exact same way in C# or Java, or as best as it can. This makes it very opinionized. So if you don't really like the style, you can't really tweak it. So Kyoda is really a preference. I prefer NSWAG personally, but there are some other really cool things about Kyoda. So Kyoda, you can also search. So you can type Kyoda in your terminal, Kyoda search GitHub. It'll actually look on the internet for, 1 second. It will look on the internet for like OpenAPI specs for that platform, which is kind of interesting. You can download them, and then you can generate APIs for them. Yeah?
What do you mean creating clients that look like each other across languages? Can you give an example?
Oh, sure. So what do I mean with clients that look the same across languages? So with C#, for example, with C#, we're going to get like a talks client, .api, .talks, .get async. So give me all the talks. In PHP, please correct me if I'm wrong. So that's going to be like talks and then like an arrow, because that's like the way to access another property, right? Talks, API, talks, get async or something like that. Or get, I don't know how that works. But it's kind of the same thing. Like it uses the same language features to kind of provide a similar experience. Right, you can use this in the CLI. There's also a VS Code extension, which you can kind of play around with to make it a little bit more visual. But yeah, it's really interesting. And of course, it supports many more options. And then there's OpenAPI Generator. I don't really have a slide for it, because it basically works the exact same way. Like there's OpenAPI Generator, or generate, and then you can provide tons and tons of settings, and then it will just come out with an API client that you don't have to write yourself. So let's do a little demo of these and get kind of a feel for what you're going to get. Let me duplicate this. All right, so what I currently have right here is I have an API The conference API, this is implemented in .NET. So this is a C# API. And I can, for example, also from a call, so I can get a list of talks, and it will turn some talks about OpenAPI, sustainable software, code dependencies, Entra, GitHub code spaces, etc. Right? So this is like an actual API returning stuff locally. And let's say that we would want to write some code that takes in this data. We want to write an API client. Says it supports JSON. It's going to say, well, it needs to append API talks. It's going to prepare some request stuff. It's going to send the request here. And then it's going to go down here, process the response, deserialize it for you. And in the end, if you look at our type system, you can see that this is going to be of a specific type. Let me get that for you. Here you go. So a talk will have an ID and a title. And this is just all generated based on your OpenAPI spec. I also wanted to show you a little bit of NSWAG here. So NSWAG Studio. So for example, I can just open my NSWAG configuration file, which will have a Swagger definition pointed towards it, which is going to be what is running on my server. So this is going to be, well, like we talked about, API talks, which is a get, which is going to return a type array of the talk schemas. And then you can simply click on generate output, generate files, and you're done. Like the API clients will be generated for you. I talked about NSWAG being very opinionized. Let me show you what I mean. So with Kyoda being very opinionized. So with Kyoda, it works a little bit differently. So here we have a Kyoda conference client, .api, .talks, get async. This is basically traveling the paths. So it was API/talks, so it will generate API.talks. Makes sense so far. But then there's going to be this. So Kyoda conference API client, API talks indexer 1. To me, that was kind of weird, because I'm like, well, how? This is not like an array, but this is the ID that you're passing in. So it's the ID 22. To me, it feels really wrong, because arrays are zero-based unless you're writing Lua, and this just feels kind of wrong and gross. But it does work. And if you're writing really good REST APIs, it's actually quite clean, but I still prefer NSWAG. But it's just what you prefer to use. And basically, if you were going to use like OpenAPI generator, it will look very similar to NSWAG. And this is just saving us a whole lot of time. So if I'm just going to run this code, I prepared it here for you. Press any key to start the demo app. That wasn't me. The alarm went off. So here we can see the NSWAG API client returns 7 talks. It will return a talk with title OpenAPI for ID 1. Now we're going to create a new talk, which is going to return a new talk with ID 8. Then it's Kyoda's turn. It's going to return 8 talks. Then it's going to create a new one, and it's going to return ID 9. Right? It's kind of simple. It's kind of easy to work with. So how simple is it to actually get started with this kind of stuff? I want to install Kyoda. I want to generate an API client, play around with it. With Kyoda, it's super simple. We can use it with the .NET tool, but you don't have to. You can also just use Kyoda yourself. Kyoda generates. We want to clean the output directory for the language C#. There's tons of options here. Bash, PHP, Java. We talked about this. The OpenAPI file is hosted at localhost. The output directory, the namespace, the class name. You run this, and it will generate all the Kyoda code for you that you can use like we just did. Maybe you want to try out NSWAG. Well, NSWAG uses a configuration file where you insert all of your settings, and you just call NSWAG run, and it will just generate all of the code. And I don't have any working example here for you for the for OpenAPI generator. So the NSWAG file, I'm just going to quickly go through here. You can have multiple code generators for TypeScript, for C#, and here you can see all of your settings. Like if there's an exception, the exception class will be called API exception, loads of other options. Any more questions about this demo before I wrap things up? Half a question is also a question.
Yeah, well, generated one time, that's great, but can you tell us some more about how versioning is handled? Because these APIs are going to change, they're going to break, there's going to be a field side, there's going to be breaking changes.
Right.
How do these tools, and how does OpenAPI in general handle these kind of situations?
Right. So how do you I'm just going to call it like, how do you deal with breaking changes with this kind of stuff? right? And how with these tools. So usually, if you're doing API building correctly, you should do API versioning. So when there's a breaking change, you implement like API/v1/talks, API/v2/talks. So breaking changes don't affect consumers. What you usually do in your framework of choice is that you have multiple OpenAPI documents. So you have like localhost / OpenAPI/v1.json / v2.json. So you have multiple documents per version. And then you can simply generate clients based on those versions. I usually like to then publish them like in NuGet packages or NPM packages or Java packages. And then you can simply provide them like version 1 is 1.0.0, a breaking change would be 2, and then you can kind of just update and distribute packages and deal with breaking changes that way.
This is not related in any way to the version field that you showed us in the beginning.
Correctly.
Of the OpenAPI,
Gotcha. So your question here is like, for example, right here. So we have a version here in OpenAPI. Yeah, this is not related to the version of your API. It's related to the version of your document. Usually, if you're going to do API versioning with like v1, v2, v3, it would make sense to make them the same. But no, it's not related to actual like API versioning. Okay, any other questions so far? 2 in the back, starting with you. Say it one more time, please. A little bit louder.
Isn't it just easier to write code ourselves
Yeah.
than to generate it and then go read it and try to understand it?
So isn't it easier to write the API client yourself, you mean? It is, well, I mean, maybe it is easy, but writing all of the logic for handling all of the possible errors, all of the deserialization and all that kind of stuff, to me is very boring. And it is again then the problem of getting things out of sync. You make one issue, you make one little typo mistake, little mistake from the server, and then you have issues. This will never make issues as long as your OpenAPI document is correct.
Okay, but we still need to review what it's
I mean, technically you're saying so, you still need to review what it's generating. I guess, I mean, technically the tools that you're using are unit tested, so they will always generate correct code based on the OpenAPI document. So I don't really review it, I just test it, but it's not going to be wrong. I just look at my OpenAPI spec, and if that's correct, the tool is correct. Okay. Sorry, I'm working left to right.
Your left?
Yeah, who's left?
You're left. Who's left?
Basically, adding, well, not adding, or maybe responding to that, your remark. There's a lot more value to having your spec in advance than just generating your client. The idea that you establish a contract up front is very valuable. For example, when you're dealing with front-end and back-end development in one application, where you can just go ahead and first sit down and agree upon with each other, like, hey, hang on, this is what we're going to be doing. Okay, let's go do it. And you could generate, but it's the underlying value of having the API being what it is and agreed upon, and this is it, and whatever your implementation you're going to be doing, generated or not, is going to work. So there's a lot more validation benefits to it.
Definitely. So exactly, like establishing the contract up front and then talking with both parties about it is just going to prevent a lot of issues. Another really cool example is the last project I work at was like with like a robot, like kind of like an inventory robot that's going to like move food around and stuff. It was at Uitgekookt, if you maybe know it. And that company was building it, and we were provided an API. So I immediately told them, give me an OpenAPI spec. And then I can just generate a client, and I can just let tooling loose on it. And I found lots of issues with their API. Instead of them just giving like self-written API docs with weird instructions on how to use it, we can just both talk about the exact same thing in our favorite way with our favorite tools. It's really useful. And then that one on the right, yeah?
Let's say, for example, you have participants for the talks.
Say again, one more, participants for the talk. Yeah.
For example, how do you get the relation? How do you define the relation from a talk to a participant?
How do you define the relation to a talk and a participant? So, okay, so let me...
Is it possible?
I'm guessing, yes, I think so. Let me just tell you a look at what I mean. So I think what you're talking about is, for example, conference. I'm just going to quickly grab a little bit of code. So you're saying, for example, we have a talk class, and this object can have participants, right? So let's have a look. So public class participant. We're doing live coding here now. This will not go wrong. Participant. This always makes me feel like a garbage programmer, man. Like, what is a keyboard? Okay, so let's say that we have a participant with a name, right? And then this talk will have a participant array of participants. We're just going to initialize this to an empty array. So like this is kind of what you mean. A talk has participants. So let's now generate our OpenAPI client for this. So I'm going to rerun this server. And this is just how easy it is to just extend your OpenAPI and generate new clients. So I'm going to... Yeah, that's what I mean. Sorry, yeah. So I'm starting the project again. And it's not starting because it's still running in the background. There we go. Live coding. Everything was going so well. Why did you have to ask that question? Start pre-build projects. There we go. Okay, so it's going to start it again. We're going to get another option. We're going to go ahead and create a local copy. And I believe it should now have participants. No. Okay, I'll fix this. Oh, right, my speaker, yeah. But that, I think the question was more like a relationship. Or do you mean actual object relationship, not participant? Okay, I know what you mean. I just want to see this work, but it doesn't want to work. I don't know why. I think it might be this URL then. Talks. Nope. Okay, I will grab the speaker one example, exactly. Thank you. Speaker. This one. Okay, so what, and I'm not sure if NSWAG can actually deal with a YAML instead of a JSON, but what this will do is this will then generate a talk class, and then it will also generate a speaker class, and then just create a property in the class to just talk to it, just like it normally would.
So could you include the relation within one request, or do you have to request every relation separately?
Okay, so can you like include all the relationships? So that basically if with just a normal REST API, you just define the body. So you define a talk that has a speaker, and you get all of that data back. So that's just kind of how that works. If you're using things like OData or GraphQL, which is not what we're going to talk about today, then that is a problem or a benefit you have to deal with like specifying what data you want. But here you specify your schema, your types, and then you get all of that back. Yeah, if that doesn't fully answer your question, let's talk afterwards, and I can give you a more concrete example. Okay, I saw one more hand raised earlier.
We have 5 minutes left.
5 minutes will be fine, thank you.
Do you have any insights on, especially with the TypeScript clients, if you have use applications with big APIs, maybe you have a front end that is user-facing, time to first content for page matters, you want to split up a bunch of the TypeScript clients. What I found was that you end up with this huge file that's like 30,000 lines long or something. Do you have any insights on how to split those things up?
That's a great question. So what if we have a really big client that's going to generate like a whole big file, and then of course your first contentful page or your binary that you're shipping to users is going to be quite big. I mean, I guess you could look into like how Angular does it. It has separate modules, so maybe you just you can use tooling and tell them what endpoints to generate, and then put that in different modules. Like you have different scripts to generate different parts of your API, put it in different modules and split it that way. Other ways is looking into things like rollup and other tools that minimize the generated code, and then it shouldn't be all that big. I think maybe the modules approach is the best one, because then you can really specify how small it is, or just look at tools that generate more efficient code.
Yeah, honestly, I didn't really look into the effect of the enormous files myself, but it's always at the back of my mind with code generation, like it generates these huge ass files. So.
Yeah, I understand. I mean, in better languages like C#, no. Sorry, I had to. I stopped myself for 50 minutes. Okay, no. I mean, if it is like minimized and everything, it should be fine. And I've not had really a big issue with it, but I guess you can split it up into modules with different generator scripts and work around it that way. Okay. Yeah, I guess you could also still manage the OpenAPI doc by hand. It's no, microservice is not the answer, trust me. Macroservice is one giant. Okay, I saw your question. I'm going to handle it at the end so I can finish my slides. Okay, there we go. Okay, so finishing up, get your phones out if you want to take some pictures. Conclusion of the slides, not me. So by using OpenAPI, you're going to unlock powerful tools for API development, including API client generation with tools like Kyoda, NSWAG, OpenAPI client generator, etc. This makes exposing your API's feature set and managing your API clients a lot easier, ensuring that they stay in sync. And just for this, using one of these tools, learning it, and actually using it in a project, I'd like to challenge you to start doing this. And once you've done this and it works, you don't want to go back, because it just makes boring stuff so much simpler, and just with one click of a button or in the pipeline, you just generate a new client and you can actually worry about fun stuff. Okay, some useful resources. Every talk I give at a conference, at a meetup or whatever, I also write an accompanying blog post. So if you're like, hey, my colleagues, my team need to see this, I need to persuade them and that kind of stuff, there you go. You can read my blog post. Everything I talked about here is written in there, and I believe they're pretty good. So scan that, read it, use it to start using OpenAPI in your own projects. If you want to learn more, OpenAPI tools, really cool. Take a look if there's something interesting for you. OpenAPIs.org is the initiative. The GitHub links to several of these generators that we use today. The link to my blog post on brinke.nl. And if you want to run these demos locally, you can do so as well on github.com/sander1095, OpenAPI code generation talk. Whew. Okay, thank you so much for attending. Don't forget I have stickers. Yeah, if there's any more questions, please let me know. I will be here longer, so if you have more big questions, just approach me. And yeah, thank you so much for being here tonight. Thank you. Do I have time for one or two more questions?
You can do one or two.
One or two, okay. Two, we'll do two. Yeah, you in the back.
Yeah, is it possible to share the model classes between different OpenAPI specifications?
Like, like you mean like you want to have like a shared file that is consumed by two?
Like the same model class that you want to use over multiple APIs.
Basically an include function.
Yes.
So like,
So for example, the speaker, you have your API with the speaker, and then you have a totally different application, but you would like to use the same model.
right, so what problem are you trying to solve? This is not meant in a haha way. I'm just kind of, because like I'm using a code first approach, and then I don't have that problem, right? Like I just have a speaker class in C# or Java or whatever, and that generates the OpenAPI. So I don't really have the problem of duplicate classes, but I can only imagine it's a design first approach, but I'm not really sure if that's what you mean.
I'm thinking about a design first approach.
Right, so you have defined a really complicated object and you want to use that in multiple APIs.
You want to have duplicate model class.
Right, okay. That's a great question. I don't think so. I'm going to have to look that up. I see someone nodding.
Yeah, so because of the response bodies can also be JSON reference, you can also reference to other files.
Really?
Reference anywhere on
Okay. Thank you. That's really, I actually learned something. So yes, it should be possible. I did this on my own. So, okay, thank you. There was one more hand I saw. Yeah.
So if we choose the code first approach,
Yeah.
Let's say in our model we have a superclass and then child class. How,
Oh no. Okay, yeah, continue,
how
please.
is the inheritance
Oh no.
represented in the OpenAPI model?
Oh, you're the source of my problems with these things, man. Okay, that works. So so how does inheritance work in OpenAPI? So I believe in OpenAPI 3 or in OpenAPI 3.1 you can do polymorphism. So you can say that a class inherits. So it's like a talk is one of session, and then it will actually and then the session is another schema, and then it will combine them. And you can also do something like a session is all of, so then you can have like multiple types. So something can represent multiple types. So this is possible. The reason why I'm like, oh fuck, oh, damn, this sucks, is because if you do this, like API client generators are not very happy when you do these kind of things because they're quite difficult. It does work, but the generated code might not be always what you expect.
And also how it's, for example, handling the differences between the languages, because not every language supports multiple inheritance.
Luckily.
Yeah,
No.
exactly. But for example, if I have a class with multiple inheritance,
Yeah.
like model, and I want to convert that to a Java code,
Mm.
will it fail or what?
That's a great question. So if I have if I'm writing my API, let's say we do a code first approach, we're using, I don't know, what language supports multiple inheritance? Oh my God. That was the quickest reaction I've ever had. So I'm like, I need to shout out my favorite language. Python, I heard Python. So Python supports that. So let's say we're writing an API in Python, we're doing multiple inheritance. We generate an OpenAPI spec that would use like all of and one of and base of maybe in this thing here. And then it depends on your generator. So some generators support it, some generators don't. It really depends on the generator you use. I think OpenAPI client generator might support it. It is usually highlighted on their project pages. So I take a look, and hopefully the code is good looking. Yeah, okay, no more questions? That was two. Well, that's fair, that's fair. It was zero-based, one more.
It wasn't, I said.
Oh, okay, no, then we can finish. We'll finish, okay. We'll do yours afterwards, thank you.
Thanks, y'all. We still have room for drinks till 10. And then we would get kicked out of the building. So enjoy. See you next time.
Don't forget the stickers.
And the stickers.